In the vast darkness between stars, where ancient civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a truth that few species dare to acknowledge: underestimating humans is the last mistake you'll ever make. Captain Sarah Chen's smile had fooled empires, toppled governments, and saved entire worlds. To alien eyes, it appeared harmless, a simple curve of lips that seemed to signal weakness, submission, even stupidity. They saw a young human female, barely past her species' maturity, commanding a small exploration vessel with what they assumed was naive optimism. They were catastrophically wrong. What they mistook for ignorance was actually the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy: human unpredictability wrapped in a deceptive package of cheerful determination. Behind that innocent smile lay the accumulated cunning of a species that had clawed its way from cave-dwelling primitives to star-conquering explorers in mere millennia. The hegemony of Zephyria learned this truth the hard way. So did the crystal courts of Andromeda. The mechanized collective of the Outer Rim discovered it too late to save themselves. Each mighty civilization that encountered Captain Chan and her crew made the same fatal error: they confused human kindness for weakness, human curiosity for foolishness, and human diplomacy for surrender. This is the story of how one human captain's smile became the stuff of legends across 1,000 worlds, and how the greatest powers in the galaxy learned that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that greets you with a friendly wave and an offer to talk things through over coffee. Ignorance, as they say, cost them everything. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Odyssey, watching the massive alien dreadnought emerge from hyperspace like a metallic mountain materializing from nothing. The ship was easily 20 times larger than her modest exploration vessel, its hull adorned with intimidating spikes and weapon arrays that could reduce entire planets to cosmic dust. Any reasonable person would have been terrified. Sarah smiled. "Incoming transmission, Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, her tactical officer. His weathered face showed the strain that came from 15 years of service, most of it in hostile territory. "It's aggressive in tone. Put it through, Marcus. Let's see what our new friends have to say." The main viewscreen flickered to life, revealing a creature that seemed designed by nightmares. The alien stood nearly 3 meters tall, with forearms ending in razor-sharp talons, and a face that was all teeth and malevolent intelligence. Its scales shifted color from deep purple to angry red as it spoke, and, when it opened its mouth, Sarah could see rows of serrated fangs that could easily tear through steel. "Pathetic mammals," the creature hissed, its voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I am War Commander Thaxel of the hegemony of Zephyria. You have entered sovereign Zephyrian space without permission. Your vessel will be impounded, your crew enslaved, and your primitive technology absorbed into our archives. Resistance is futile and will only increase your suffering." Sarah's smile widened, and she clasped her hands behind her back in a gesture that her crew had learned to recognize. It meant their captain was about to do something that would either be brilliant or completely insane. Sometimes both. "Hello there, War Commander Thaxel," Sarah replied with the same tone she might use to greet a neighbor over the fence. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Odyssey. It's wonderful to meet you. I do hope we got off on the wrong foot here." The alien's scale shifted to a deeper shade of red, clearly indicating increased aggression. Behind Sarah, she could hear her chief science officer, Dr. Elena Vasquez, muttering calculations under her breath. Elena always did that when she was nervous, working through probability matrices as if numbers could somehow protect them from situations that defied logic. "You mock me, human," Thaxel snarled. "Your species is known to us. Weak, short-lived, and technologically inferior. You spread across the galaxy like a plague, contaminating everything you touch with your pathetic emotions and illogical behavior." "Oh my," Sarah said, her expression shifting to one of genuine concern. "That's quite a harsh assessment. Have you actually met many humans, War Commander? Because I think there might be some misconceptions here that we could clear up with a good conversation." Chief Engineer Tommy Rodriguez, working at a console behind the captain's chair, caught Webb's eye and made a subtle gesture. The entire bridge crew had served together for over 3 years, and they communicated with the efficiency of a unit that had survived impossible odds through trust and coordination. Tommy's signal was clear, engines and weapons were ready, but, more importantly, he was prepared to implement what they privately called Protocol Chen, the collection of seemingly impossible maneuvers their captain had developed over their years of exploration. Misconceptions? Thaxel's laugh was like grinding metal. Your ship is alone, primitive, and surrounded by 12 of our finest dreadnoughts. You have no allies, no hope of escape, and no chance of survival. Yet you smile at me as if we are discussing the weather. Either you are insane, or you are too stupid to understand your situation. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this assessment with genuine interest. You know, War Commander, you raise an interesting point about perspective. From your viewpoint, you see a small human ship surrounded by superior firepower. That's a perfectly logical assessment based on traditional military thinking. She paused, and her smile took on a quality that made her own crew slightly nervous. It was the same expression she'd worn just before she'd talked the crystalline merchants of Vega into giving them a full cargo hold of rare metals in exchange for what amounted to a recipe for chocolate chip cookies. But, here's the thing about humans that a lot of species don't quite grasp, Sarah continued. We have this peculiar habit of redefining the rules of engagement when we're supposed to be at a disadvantage. It's gotten us into trouble before, but it's also gotten us out of trouble in ways that tend to surprise everyone involved. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her tablet displaying rapidly scrolling data. Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups across their fleet. Weapons charging, engines powering up for attack formation. Thank you, Elena, Sarah acknowledged, never taking her eyes off the alien commander. War Commander Thaxel, I have a proposition for you. How about we engage in a little experiment? A test, if you will, of human versus Zephyrian tactical thinking. You waste time with words, Thaxel growled. There will be no negotiation, no surrender terms. Your death will serve as a message to other humans who dare to trespass in hegemony space. Oh, I'm not talking about negotiation, Sarah said, her tone remaining conversational despite the increasing tension on the bridge. I'm talking about a demonstration. You see, you've made an assumption about human behavior based on incomplete data. You think we're weak because we smile and try to talk things through. You think we're primitive because our ship is smaller and our weapons appear less sophisticated. She turned to Webb, who was monitoring the tactical display with the intensity of a predator watching its prey. Marcus, what's our current status? All systems green, Captain. We're reading multiple target locks from the Zephyrian fleet, but they haven't fired yet. I think they're enjoying the chance to intimidate us. Perfect, Sarah said, turning back to the viewscreen. War Commander, here's what's about to happen. In approximately 30 seconds, your entire fleet is going to be completely disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. We're going to do this without firing a single weapon, and we're going to do it while maintaining a respectful distance from your vessels. Thaxel's scale shifted to a color that the translation software couldn't interpret, but his expression was universal, complete disdain mixed with growing fury. Impossible. Your ship lacks the power to affect even one of our vessels, much less 12. You're absolutely right about our power levels, Sarah agreed cheerfully. We're definitely not going to overpower you. Tommy, initiate the Chen maneuver, full implementation. The bridge hummed with activity as her crew moved with practiced precision. Rodriguez's fingers flew across his engineering console. Elena began broadcasting what appeared to be a scientific survey pulse, and Webb started making minute adjustments to their navigation system. To the Zephyrian fleet, the Odyssey appeared to be conducting some kind of sensor sweep, the sort of pathetic last-ditch information gathering that a doomed ship might attempt before its destruction. Their instruments detected no weapon charging, no shield reinforcement, no preparation for combat whatsoever. This was exactly what Sarah was counting on. You see, War Commander, she continued, as if discussing an interesting scientific phenomenon, humans have this interesting relationship with technology. We don't just use it, we abuse it, modify it, and make it do things it was never designed to do. Sometimes this causes spectacular failures, but, occasionally, it produces results that are rather unexpected. Elena's sensor pulse reached the nearest Zephyrian dreadnought, and something very interesting happened. The pulse didn't bounce off the ship's shields as expected. Instead, it passed through them as if they didn't exist, interacted with the ship's power grid in a way that violated several known laws of physics, and created a resonance cascade that spread through the vessel's entire electrical system. The lights on the dreadnought flickered once, then went out completely. "What sorcery is this?" Thaxel demanded, but his voice carried the first note of uncertainty since the conversation had begun. "Oh, not sorcery at all," Sarah replied, watching with satisfaction as the sensor pulse jumped to the second dreadnought, then the third. "It's actually quite simple physics, just applied in a way that most species would consider completely insane." "Elena, would you like to explain?" Dr. Vasquez looked up from her console, her usual nervousness replaced by the excitement of a scientist witnessing something genuinely unprecedented. "We're using a modified quantum entanglement pulse to create sympathetic resonance in the crystalline matrix that most advanced civilizations use for power distribution. The pulse doesn't carry enough energy to damage anything, but it does create a feedback loop that forces the system to shut down as a safety measure. The beautiful part," Tommy added from his engineering station, "is that the more sophisticated the power grid, the more vulnerable it is to this particular type of interference. A primitive electrical system would barely notice it, but these advanced networks are so interconnected that one small disruption cascades through the entire ship." Thaxel watched in growing horror as ship after ship in his fleet went dark. Within 2 minutes, 11 of his 12 dreadnoughts were floating dead in space, their crews undoubtedly scrambling to restart systems that had never been designed to recover from this type of failure. "Impossible," he whispered. "Our technology is thousands of years more advanced than yours. Our power systems are the most sophisticated in the galaxy." "Oh, absolutely," Sarah agreed. "And that's exactly why this works. You see, War Commander, humans have been dealing with technology failing at the worst possible moment for our entire history. We've learned to build redundancies, workarounds, and backup systems for our backup systems. But, more importantly, we've learned to think about technology as a tool that can be used in ways its creators never intended." The last functional dreadnought began moving away from the disabled fleet, its commander apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. Sarah made a small gesture to Webb, who adjusted their course to intercept. "Now, here's where things get interesting," Sarah continued, her smile taking on that particular quality that had worried her crew earlier. "You threaten to enslave my crew and absorb our technology. That's what we humans would call hostile intent, and it triggers certain protocols in our behavior." She turned to Webb. "Marcus, please transmit our standard first contact package to the Zephyrian Hegemony's Central Command. Full cultural exchange protocols, technology sharing agreements, and our complete diplomatic framework for establishing peaceful relations." "Aye, Captain. Transmitting now." Thaxel stared at her in complete confusion. You wish to negotiate? After demonstrating this devastating weapon?" "Weapon." Sarah laughed, and the sound was genuinely warm and amused. "War Commander, we haven't used any weapons. What we just demonstrated is a scanning technique that happens to have an interesting side effect on certain types of power grids. We use it primarily for archaeological surveys of dead civilizations." She leaned forward slightly, and her expression became serious for the first time since the conversation began. "But here's what I want you to understand, and what I want you to communicate to your superiors in the hegemony. Humans don't typically threaten people. We smile, we offer to share our coffee and our stories, and we try to find common ground. But if you threaten us, if you try to harm our friends or our family, we become something else entirely." The final dreadnought had stopped its retreat and was holding position, its commander apparently waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve. "What we just did to your fleet, that's not our most dangerous capability. It's not even close. It's just a convenient demonstration of human problem-solving applied to a situation where we were expected to be helpless. We turned your technological superiority into a vulnerability using nothing but creativity and a willingness to try something that probably shouldn't work." She stood up from her captain's chair and smoothed down her uniform, a simple gesture that somehow carried more authority than any amount of shouting or posturing could have achieved. "So here's what's going to happen, War Commander. We're going to help your crews restore power to their ships. We're going to provide detailed technical data about what we did and how to defend against it. We're going to offer trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and scientific collaboration that will benefit both our species for generations to come. Thaxel's scales had shifted to a color that the translation matrix identified as deep confusion mixed with grudging respect. And, if we refuse? If we choose to see you as a threat to be eliminated? Sarah's smile returned, but it was different now, sharper, more focused, carrying implications that made even her own crew slightly uncomfortable. Well, War Commander, that would be your choice to make. But, I should mention that what you've seen today represents about 30 seconds of human tactical thinking applied to a problem we'd never encountered before. Imagine what we could accomplish if we actually had time to prepare, if we saw you as a genuine threat rather than just a misunderstanding waiting to be resolved. She gestured to the view screen, where the disabled dreadnoughts hung in space like sleeping giants. We prefer friendship, War Commander. We really do. We like making allies, sharing stories, and finding ways for everyone to benefit from our interactions. But, if friendship isn't possible? She paused, letting the implications hang in the space between ships. Well, let's just say that underestimating humans has historically been a mistake that civilizations only make once. The bridge of the Odyssey fell silent except for the gentle hum of their engines and the quiet beeping of monitoring systems. In that silence, Sarachin waited to see whether the Zephyrian hegemony would choose wisdom or pride, cooperation or conflict. The choice they made would determine whether this first contact became the foundation for a lasting alliance or the opening move in a war that would reshape the galaxy. Either way, Sarah was ready. Her smile never wavered. 3 standard hours after the disabling of the Zephyrian fleet, Captain Sarachin sat in her ready room reviewing diplomatic protocols while sipping coffee that would have been considered contraband on half the worlds in known space. The beverage was one of humanity's more successful cultural exports, though few alien species understood why humans insisted on consuming a bitter stimulant that technically qualified as a mild poison. The door chimed, and Marcus Webb entered with a datapad and the expression of a man who had spent his career preparing for every possible scenario except the one currently unfolding. Captain, we're receiving multiple communications from Zephyrian Central Command. The initial response was colorful. Sarah gestured for him to sit down. Through her ready room's viewport, she could see the Zephyrian fleet in the process of restoration. True to her word, she had provided complete technical assistance to help them recover from the quantum resonance cascade. Her engineering teams were currently aboard 3 of the dreadnoughts, working alongside Zephyrian technicians who were discovering that human approaches to problem solving were even more unconventional up close. How colorful are we talking, Marcus? Declare war and mobilize the entire hegemony colorful, or demand an explanation and threaten severe consequences colorful? Somewhere between the two, actually. The initial response came from someone called Supreme War Marshal Kethvar, who seemed to be under the impression that we had used some kind of superweapon. He was calling for immediate retaliation against human space. Webb scrolled through his datapad, highlighting relevant sections. But, then, something interesting happened. War Commander Thaxel submitted his full report, including sensor data from the incident and recordings of your entire conversation. The tone of subsequent communications shifted dramatically. Oh? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Shifted how? Well, the second message came from someone identified as High Strategist Velnara, who apparently holds a position roughly equivalent to our Secretary of Defense. She was asking detailed technical questions about the resonance cascade effect and inquiring about the possibility of defensive measures. Sarah smiled, recognizing the pattern. It was the same progression she had seen with the Antaran Trade Federation and the mechanized collective initial aggression giving way to professional interest as the implications of human capabilities became clear. And the third message? That one came from Chancellor Prime Zekthul himself. He's requesting a formal diplomatic meeting to discuss what he called mutual interests and potential collaboration. He also specifically mentioned that any further hostile actions against human vessels are temporarily suspended pending the outcome of negotiations. Excellent. How long before the meeting? Webb consulted his chronometer. They're proposing tomorrow at 1400 hours, aboard their command ship. Full diplomatic protocols, neutral meeting space, the works. They even offered to provide human-compatible atmosphere and seating arrangements. Sarah stood up and moved to her viewport, watching a human engineering team emerge from one of the dreadnoughts. Even from this distance, she could see the animated gestures that indicated a successful technical exchange. Humans had a talent for turning former enemies into colleagues simply by showing them interesting ways to solve problems. What's the current status of our relationship with Earth Command? Admiral Harrison is following the situation closely, but he's maintaining the usual policy of trusting your judgment until you ask for backup or start a galactic war. His exact words were, "Chen hasn't let us down yet, and her success rate for turning hostile situations into profitable partnerships is still running at about 97%. Only 97%? Sarah looked genuinely disappointed. I'll have to work on that. What about the crew? How are they handling our new friends? Actually, that's the most interesting part of this whole situation. Tommy's engineering teams are having the time of their lives working with Zephyrian technology. Turns out their power distribution systems are based on crystalline matrix networks that our people have only seen in theoretical models. The Zephyrians are equally fascinated by our approach to redundancy and failsafes. Webb paused, consulting his notes. Elena's been exchanging data with their science officers about quantum entanglement applications, and apparently their knowledge of subspace physics is about 300 years ahead of ours. Meanwhile, they're amazed by our materials science and our approach to what they call aggressive improvisation. And the tactical situation? That's where things get really interesting. Their military doctrine is based on overwhelming technological superiority and coordinated fleet actions. The idea of a single ship disabling an entire fleet using what amounts to a scanning technique has them completely rethinking their strategic assumptions. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. This was exactly the kind of cultural exchange that made first contact situations so valuable when both sides discovered that their fundamental assumptions about warfare, technology, and problem solving were not universal constants. The door chimed again, and Dr. Elena Vasquez entered with the slightly manic expression of a scientist who had discovered something genuinely unprecedented. "Captain, you need to see this. The Zephyrians have agreed to share some of their scientific databases as part of the technical exchange, and what I'm finding is absolutely fascinating." Elena activated the room's display system, bringing up a complex three-dimensional model that showed star charts, fleet movements, and what appeared to be historical data spanning several millennia. According to their records, the Zephyrian hegemony has been the dominant military power in this region of space for over 4,000 years. They've conquered or absorbed 37 different civilizations during that time, and they've never, not once, encountered meaningful resistance to their standard tactics. Until now, Sarah observed. Exactly. But here's the really interesting part. I've been analyzing their historical records of first contact situations, and there's a clear pattern. They make initial contact with overwhelming force, demonstrate their technological superiority, and then offer terms of surrender. Most species comply immediately. Those that resist are systematically defeated using standard fleet tactics. Elena manipulated the display, showing a series of battle scenarios that followed predictable patterns. Large fleets versus smaller forces, technological superiority overwhelming primitive weapons, resistance lasting hours or days at most. What I'm realizing is that their entire military philosophy is based on the assumption that all conflicts will follow certain predictable patterns. Superior technology defeats inferior technology. Larger fleets defeat smaller fleets. Established tactics defeat improvised responses. But humans don't follow those patterns, Webb observed. Not even close. Look at this. Elena brought up a new display showing human military history. Every major human military victory in the last 500 years has involved some form of tactical innovation, technological adaptation, or strategic thinking that redefined the rules of engagement. She highlighted specific examples: the Battle of Proxima Centauri, where a small human fleet had defeated a much larger Antaran force by weaponizing cargo containers; the Siege of New Geneva, where human defenders had held off a 2-month assault by using civilian manufacturing equipment to build custom defensive systems; the Great Deception at Wolf 359, where an entire human colony had convinced an invading force that they were dealing with an advanced AI civilization rather than organic beings. The Zephyrians are trying to understand how we think about conflict, and they're running into a fundamental problem. we don't think about it the same way anyone else does. We see rules as suggestions, limitations as creative challenges, and disadvantages as opportunities for innovation. Sarah studied the displays with growing interest. The pattern Elena was describing explained a lot about their current situation and suggested some intriguing possibilities for the upcoming negotiations. What's their assessment of human technological capabilities? That's where it gets complicated. They can see that our overall technology level is several centuries behind theirs in most areas. Our ships are smaller, our weapons less powerful, our energy sources less efficient. By any reasonable metric, we should be completely outclassed. Elena paused, bringing up a new set of data that showed comparative technology assessments. But, they're also realizing that we use our technology differently. Where they focus on optimization and efficiency, we focus on adaptability and innovation. Where they build systems to work perfectly under ideal conditions, we build systems that can function under any conditions and be modified on the fly. The quantum resonance cascade being a perfect example, Webb added. Exactly. What we did to their fleet represents a way of thinking that they literally cannot comprehend. They build power grids to be as stable and efficient as possible. We look at those same power grids and see potential vulnerabilities that can be exploited with the right kind of interference pattern. Sarah moved back to her desk, considering the implications of what Elena was describing. The diplomatic meeting tomorrow would not just be about establishing peaceful relations, it would be about fundamentally different ways of understanding technology, conflict, and problem solving. Elena, I want you to prepare a complete analysis of human technological philosophy for the meeting tomorrow. Focus on our approach to innovation, adaptation, and what you called aggressive improvisation. Include historical examples, but also theoretical applications. You want to show them how we think? I want to show them that how we think is as valuable as what we know. If they're as advanced as you say they are, then they have knowledge we can use. But if we're as innovative as we think we are, then we have approaches they can benefit from. Webb leaned forward with interest. You're proposing a genuine technological partnership? I'm proposing something more comprehensive than that. The Zephyrians have built an empire based on technological superiority and military dominance. But empires like that always eventually encounter something they can't simply overpower. Sarah gestured toward the viewport, where the restored dreadnoughts hung in space like sleeping giants. We've just shown them that their fundamental assumptions about conflict might be incomplete. Tomorrow, we're going to show them that there might be better ways to approach the problems they've been solving with force. The Ready Room's communication system chimed, indicating an incoming message from the Zephyrian command ship. Sarah accepted the transmission, and the familiar form of War Commander Thaxel appeared on the display. His scales had shifted to a color that the translation matrix identified as respectful attention, and his posture suggested someone who had undergone a significant change in perspective over the past few hours. Captain Chen, I am transmitting a formal invitation to tomorrow's diplomatic meeting on behalf of Chancellor Prime Zekthal. I have also been asked to convey his personal gratitude for your assistance in restoring our fleet capabilities. You're very welcome, War Commander. I hope your technicians found the experience educational. Indeed. Our chief engineer has submitted a report describing human maintenance protocols as brilliantly chaotic and surprisingly effective. He has also requested permission to exchange technical personnel with your engineering teams for extended collaboration. Sarah smiled. I think that could be arranged. Innovation tends to flourish when different perspectives are combined with mutual respect. Thaxel's scales shifted to what appeared to be a more relaxed configuration. Captain, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Why did you choose to assist us in restoring our ships? You had demonstrated the ability to disable our entire fleet. You could have simply departed and left us helpless. Sarah considered the question carefully. It was exactly the kind of inquiry that revealed fundamental differences in thinking between species, and her answer would likely influence the tone of tomorrow's negotiations. War Commander, humans have a saying, the best way to defeat an enemy is to make him your friend. What happened today wasn't about proving our superiority, it was about demonstrating that conflict wasn't necessary. She paused, organizing her thoughts. You saw us as weak and primitive, so you threatened us. We showed you that appearances can be deceiving, but we also showed you that we preferred cooperation to conflict. By helping restore your ships, we demonstrated that our capabilities aren't primarily intended as weapons, they're tools for solving problems and building relationships. And if we had chosen to continue hostilities? Sarah's expression became more serious. Then, we would have continued to defend ourselves using whatever methods proved necessary. But, I much prefer the outcome we achieved instead. Faxol nodded slowly, a gesture that looked oddly human despite his alien physiology. I believe tomorrow's meeting will be most enlightening for all parties involved. After the transmission ended, Sarah turned back to her staff. The next 24 hours would determine whether this first contact became the foundation for a lasting alliance or simply a temporary ceasefire before renewed hostilities. Marcus, I want full diplomatic protocols in effect for tomorrow's meeting. Elena, prepare your technological analysis but also put together some proposals for joint research projects. Focus on areas where human innovation could complement Zephyrian knowledge. What about security arrangements? Webb asked. Sarah smiled, the same expression that had started this entire sequence of events. We'll take standard precautions, but I think the biggest risk tomorrow won't be treachery, it will be that both sides might discover they have more in common than they originally thought. As her staff departed to make preparations for tomorrow's historic meeting, Sarah remained at her viewport, watching the lights of the Zephyrian fleet twinkle in the darkness of space. In a few hours, she would be sitting across a negotiating table from beings who had spent millennia conquering other species through technological superiority. Tomorrow, they would all discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an infinitely adaptable object. Sarah was looking forward to the conversation. The diplomatic meeting aboard the Zephyrian command vessel began with what could only be described as a carefully orchestrated display of intimidation. Captain Sarah Chan and her delegation were escorted through corridors lined with trophy displays from conquered civilizations, artifacts, weapons, and cultural symbols arranged to demonstrate the inevitable fate of those who opposed hegemony power. Sarah examined each display with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions about the civilizations they represented. Her escorts, elite Zephyrian guards who stood nearly 4 meters tall and were armed with weapons that could level city blocks, seemed increasingly puzzled by her apparent fascination with their conquest museum. This crystalline artwork is remarkable, Sarah commented, studying an intricate sculpture that seemed to shift colors in response to ambient light. The mathematical precision in the geometric patterns suggests a species with an extraordinary understanding of multidimensional physics. Guard Captain Veltosh, who had been assigned to lead the escort, paused in his stride. The crystalline courts of Andromeda were indeed technologically sophisticated. They believed their force field technology made them invulnerable to conventional attack. What happened to them? They were absorbed into the hegemony after a brief conflict. Their technology is now used in our defensive systems. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I'd love to learn more about how you integrated their knowledge with your existing systems. That kind of technological synthesis must have presented fascinating challenges. The guard captain's expression suggested he was not accustomed to discussing conquered civilizations in terms of academic interest rather than military victory. Perhaps Chancellor Prime Zekthal would be willing to discuss such matters during the negotiation. The conference chamber itself was designed to reinforce hegemony dominance, a vast space with seating arrangements that placed visitors at a clear disadvantage while allowing Zephyrian officials to literally look down on their guests. The lighting was harsh and angular, creating an atmosphere of judgment rather than collaboration. Sarah surveyed the room with the same cheerful interest she had shown the trophy corridor. Impressive architecture. The acoustic properties must be excellent for formal declarations and ceremonial proceedings. She turned to Marcus Webb, who was carrying a standard diplomatic case along with several items that would have been completely mysterious to their hosts. Marcus, let's rearrange the seating a bit. I think we can create a more collaborative environment. Before their Zephyrian hosts could object, Sarah and her team began moving chairs and adjusting the configuration to create a circular arrangement rather than the confrontational setup originally planned. The human delegation worked with the easy efficiency of people who had done this sort of thing many times before. Captain Chen interrupted a voice from the chamber's entrance. Chancellor Prime Zekthal entered with a retinue of advisors, military officers, and what appeared to be scientific personnel. The Chancellor Prime was older than the other Zephyrians they had encountered, with scales that had shifted to a deep gold color indicating high rank and advanced age. "Your behavior continues to confound our expectations," he continued, gesturing toward the rearranged seating. "You treat this meeting as if it were a social gathering rather than a formal negotiation between civilizations." Sarah smiled and extended her hand in the universal human greeting. "Chancellor Prime Zekthal, it's an honor to meet you. I prefer to think of this as a conversation between colleagues rather than a confrontation between adversaries." The Chancellor Prime stared at her extended hand for a moment, then surprised everyone in the room by accepting the handshake. His grip was careful, mindful of the difference in their physiologies, but firm enough to convey respect. "Indeed. Please, let us begin. I confess that your actions yesterday have raised questions that our military strategists are struggling to answer." As both delegations took their seats in the newly configured arrangement, Sarah opened her diplomatic case and removed several items that immediately captured the attention of every Zephyrian in the room: a thermos of coffee, a plate of chocolate chip cookies, and what appeared to be a child's toy, a simple puzzle box made of colored wooden blocks. "Before we begin formal discussions," Sarah said, pouring coffee into cups she had brought specifically for this purpose, "I'd like to share something that might help explain human approaches to problem solving." She offered coffee to Chancellor Prime Zekthal, who accepted it with curiosity. The rich aroma filled the chamber, and Sarah noticed several Zephyrian officials leaning forward with interest despite themselves. This beverage represents something fundamental about human culture. Coffee is technically a mild toxin. It contains alkaloids that most species find unpalatable or harmful. But humans discovered that when properly prepared, these same compounds produce beneficial effects: enhanced alertness, improved cognitive function, and social bonding. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped forward with her analysis prepared. "The key insight is that humans don't just adapt to their environment, they actively seek ways to transform potential problems into advantages. We took something that should have been harmful and made it central to our social and professional interactions." Chancellor Prime Zekthal tasted the coffee carefully, his expression shifting through several configurations before settling on what appeared to be surprised appreciation. "The flavor is complex. Bitter, yet somehow satisfying. And I do notice enhanced mental clarity." "Exactly," Sarah said, then picked up the puzzle box. "This toy demonstrates another aspect of human thinking. Elena, would you like to explain the strategic implications?" Elena activated a holographic projector, showing the puzzle box's internal structure, dozens of interlocking pieces that could be arranged in multiple configurations. Human children play with objects like this from an early age. The goal isn't just to solve the puzzle, but to understand how the pieces interact and to discover new ways of combining them. She manipulated the hologram to show different solutions to the same puzzle. What we learn from these exercises is that most problems have multiple solutions, and that the most obvious approach isn't always the most effective one. We train ourselves to see patterns, relationships, and possibilities that others might miss. High strategist Velnara, who had remained silent throughout the initial presentations, leaned forward with obvious interest. "You are suggesting that human strategic thinking is based on toys?" Sarah laughed, and the sound somehow transformed the atmosphere in the chamber from formal negotiation to collaborative discussion. "Not just toys, the entire human educational and cultural system is built around encouraging people to question assumptions, experiment with new approaches, and find creative solutions to impossible problems." She gestured to Marcus Webb, who activated his own presentation system. The display showed historical examples of human innovation: the development of flight despite it being scientifically impossible, the creation of space travel using chemical rockets that everyone agreed were too dangerous and inefficient, the invention of quantum computers using principles that violated classical physics. Every major human technological advancement has involved someone looking at a problem that everyone else considered solved and asking, what if we tried something completely different? Chancellor Prime Zekthal studied the historical examples with growing fascination. "Your species appears to actively seek out inefficient and dangerous approaches to problem solving." "Not inefficient," Webb corrected. "Unconventional. There's a significant difference. We don't abandon efficiency as a goal, we just refuse to accept that current efficient methods are the only possible solutions. Sarah stood up and moved to the chamber's central display system. Chancellor Prime, may I show you something that might interest you? With his permission, she activated the system and brought up a three-dimensional model of the quantum resonance cascade that had disabled the Zephyrian fleet the previous day. Your power distribution systems are marvels of engineering, incredibly sophisticated, highly efficient, and capable of handling enormous energy loads. By any reasonable measure, they represent the pinnacle of electrical grid technology. She manipulated the display to highlight specific components of the Zephyrian power grid. But humans have a different relationship with sophisticated systems. We assume that anything complex enough to be really useful is also complex enough to be vulnerable in unexpected ways. The display shifted to show the resonance cascade effect propagating through the power grid network. We didn't defeat your technology, we used its own sophistication against itself. The more advanced and interconnected your systems became, the more susceptible they were to this particular type of interference. High Strategist Velnara was taking notes with intense concentration. You identified a vulnerability that our engineers had never considered because it required thinking about the system in ways it was never intended to be used. Exactly. And here's the important part, we're not the only ones who can think this way. Every civilization has unique perspectives and approaches that could reveal insights invisible to everyone else. Sarah returned to her seat and picked up one of the cookies. These are chocolate chip cookies, another example of human adaptation. We combined ingredients from different continents, developed new baking techniques, and created something that didn't exist in nature but that most humans find irresistible. She offered the plate to Chancellor Prime Zekthal, who accepted a cookie with careful curiosity. His expression after tasting it was remarkably similar to his reaction to the coffee, surprise followed by appreciation. The sweetness is compelling. And the texture provides an interesting contrast to the flavor elements. Now imagine what we could accomplish if we combined human innovation with Zephyrian technological sophistication, Sarah suggested. Your people have mastered efficient, stable, powerful systems. Our people excel at finding new ways to use existing systems and new approaches to unsolvable problems. Dr. Vasquez activated another display, this one showing theoretical collaboration possibilities. We've identified 17 areas where human and Zephyrian knowledge could be combined to produce results that neither species could achieve independently. The list included advances in energy production, faster-than-light travel, terraforming technology, and something labeled defensive innovation protocols. Chancellor Prime Zekthal studied the proposals with growing interest. These collaborative projects would require unprecedented levels of technological sharing and joint research initiatives. True, Sarah agreed. It would also require a fundamental shift in how the hegemony approaches relationships with other civilizations. Instead of conquest and absorption, you'd be looking at partnership and mutual development. The chamber fell silent as the implications of what Sarah was proposing became clear. She wasn't just offering peaceful coexistence, she was suggesting a complete transformation of hegemony policy toward other species. High Strategist Velnara was the first to speak. Captain Shen, what you're describing would represent the most significant change in hegemony policy in over 3 millennia. The political and strategic implications are staggering. I understand that, Sarah replied. But consider the alternative implications. Yesterday, a single human exploration vessel disabled your entire fleet using technology you didn't know existed. What happens when you encounter another species with equally unconventional capabilities? Or when multiple species start sharing defensive innovations? She gestured toward the display showing human technological history. Human development accelerated dramatically once we started sharing knowledge with other species rather than competing against them. The Antaran Trade Federation, the Mechanized Collective, the Crystal Courts, all of our former enemies have become our strongest allies and most productive research partners. Chancellor Prime Zekthal leaned back in his chair, his scales shifting through several color configurations as he processed what he was hearing. You're suggesting that the hegemony's policy of conquest through technological superiority is ultimately self-defeating. I'm suggesting that it's incomplete, Sarah corrected. Conquest can secure territory and resources, but it can't secure innovation and creativity. Those emerge from collaboration, mutual respect, and the kind of cultural exchange that happens when different species work together as equals. She stood up and moved to the chamber's viewport, where the combined human and Zephyrian fleets could be seen working together to implement improvements to both sets of ships. Look at what's already happening out there. Your engineers and our engineers are solving problems together that neither group could handle alone. Your people are learning about adaptive redundancy and emergency improvisation. Our people are learning about optimization and systematic efficiency. Marcus Webb joined her at the viewport. Captain, we're receiving reports from the joint engineering teams. They've identified potential improvements to both human and Zephyrian systems that could increase efficiency by 30 to 40% across both fleets. Sarah turned back to the Zephyrian delegation with satisfaction. 30 to 40% improvement in just 24 hours of collaboration. Imagine what we could accomplish with a formal partnership spanning years or decades. Chancellor Prime Zekthal stood and moved to join them at the viewport. Captain Chen, what you're proposing would require me to convince the Hegemony Council that our most fundamental policies need to be reconsidered. The political challenges alone would be significant, Sarah agreed. But they might be easier to overcome if you had concrete examples of the benefits of this new approach. She smiled, and Chancellor Prime Zekthal was beginning to understand why that expression had become legendary among species that had encountered humans. What kind of examples? Well, Sarah said, we've been monitoring subspace communications in this region, and it appears that the hegemony is currently facing some challenges with a species called the Void Hunters. Aggressive, technologically advanced, and apparently immune to conventional military tactics. The effect of this statement on the Zephyrian delegation was immediate and dramatic. Several advisors began speaking in urgent undertones, and High Strategist Velnara's expression suggested that Sarah had just demonstrated knowledge of classified military information. How did you? Chancellor Prime Zekthal began, then stopped himself. Of course. Human intelligence gathering capabilities are apparently as unconventional as your other technologies. We prefer to think of it as paying attention to what's happening around us, Sarah replied diplomatically. But, the point is, the Void Hunters represent exactly the kind of problem that might benefit from a collaborative approach. Your conventional military tactics aren't working against them because they don't follow conventional tactical patterns. She paused, letting the implications sink in. But, human approaches to asymmetric warfare combined with Zephyrian technological capabilities? That might produce some very interesting results. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of possibilities and the recognition that the galaxy was about to become a very different place. Chancellor Prime Zekthal looked around the chamber at his advisors, then, back at Sarah Chen's confident smile. Captain Chen, I believe we have much to discuss. 3 weeks after the historic diplomatic breakthrough with the Zephyrian hegemony, Captain Sarah Chen found herself aboard the flagship of the largest combined fleet in galactic history. The massive vessel, christened the Harmony through a human suggestion that had initially puzzled Zephyrian linguists, represented the first fruit of the new alliance between species that had been enemies just months before. The ship itself was a marvel of collaborative engineering. Zephyrian technological sophistication had been enhanced with human adaptive design principles, creating systems that were both highly efficient and remarkably resilient. Human creativity had been amplified by Zephyrian computational power, producing innovations that neither species could have achieved independently. Sarah stood on the bridge beside Chancellor Prime Zekthal, now serving as Joint Fleet Commander, watching sensor displays that showed something unprecedented in galactic military history. The Void Hunters, the mysterious species that had been systematically destroying Zephyrian outposts for the past 2 years, were about to encounter an enemy unlike anything they had faced before. Contact Bearing 27 Mark IV, reported Commander Thaxel, who had requested assignment to the Joint Fleet despite it meaning a significant reduction in his formal authority. Void Hunter Battle Group, 12 vessels, approaching at high sublight speed. The tactical display showed enemy ships that seemed to defy conventional understanding of spacecraft design. They appeared to be constructed from some kind of dark material that absorbed sensor scans, giving them an insubstantial, almost ghostly appearance. Their movement patterns were equally disturbing. They moved through space in ways that suggested either revolutionary propulsion technology or a fundamental misunderstanding of physics on the part of everyone else.
Sensor analysis, Dr. Vasquez?
Sarah requested. Elena looked up from her science station with the expression of someone who had been studying impossible data for 3 weeks and was still no closer to understanding it. Still getting the same anomalous readings, Captain. The Void Hunter ships don't register on conventional sensors as discrete objects. Instead, they appear as areas of space where normal physics seems to be negotiable.
Meaning?
Meaning they're not just using advanced technology, they're using technology that operates according to different natural laws than the rest of us understand. Mass, energy, momentum, all of the basic constants that govern spacecraft behavior seem to work differently for them.
Chancellor Prime Zekthal's scales had shifted to the deep blue color that indicated intense concentration. This explains why our conventional tactics have proven ineffective. We have been attempting to fight an enemy using strategies based on assumptions they do not share. The communication system activated, carrying the voice of Admiral Harrison from Earth Command. The Joint Fleet maintained open communication with all Allied headquarters, another innovation that had required extensive diplomatic coordination. Harmony, this is Admiral Harrison. We're monitoring your situation from Sol System.
Latest intelligence suggests the Void Hunters have been using this same tactical approach against 12 different civilizations over the past decade.
Standard engagement protocols have failed in every recorded case.
Copy that, Admiral, Sarah replied.
But, then, we're not planning on using standard engagement protocols.
She turned to the assembled command staff, a mixture of human, Zephyrian, and observer species that had been drawn into the alliance as word of the collaborative successes had spread throughout the region. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished non-carbon-based intelligences, we're about to test our new tactical doctrine against an enemy that has never been successfully engaged using conventional means.
Dr. Vasquez, please brief the fleet on the operational parameters.
Elena activated the fleet-wide communication system, addressing the crews of over 200 ships representing 17 different species and technological approaches. The diversity itself was strategic. If the Void Hunters operated according to different natural laws, then, perhaps they could be countered by approaches based on different technological assumptions.
All vessels, this is Dr. Vasquez with tactical analysis.
The Void Hunter ships appear to exist in a state of quantum superposition relative to normal spacetime. This means they can effectively ignore most forms of energy-based attacks and can phase through conventional barriers. The display showed previous engagement recordings where Zephyrian energy weapons had passed harmlessly through Void Hunter ships, and where the enemy vessels had moved through solid asteroid fields as if the rocks weren't there. However, our joint research teams have identified several theoretical vulnerabilities in this approach. If the Void Hunters are maintaining quantum coherence across their entire fleet structure, then certain types of interference should be able to disrupt their phase stability.
Commander Thaxel leaned forward with interest. What types of interference?
The kind that humans accidentally create all the time, Elena replied with satisfaction. Uncontrolled quantum entanglement, localized spacetime distortions, and massive electromagnetic pulse events that most civilizations carefully avoid because they interfere with precision navigation and communication.
Sarah smiled, recognizing the pattern that had become familiar over their weeks of joint operation planning. Once again, human technological limitations were about to become tactical advantages. Fleet positions, Mr. Webb?
Marcus Webb consulted his tactical display, which showed the combined fleet arranged in a formation that looked more like a jazz band than a military formation. Ships were grouped not by species or firepower, but by the types of technological disruption they were capable of producing.
Formation Chaos is ready for implementation, Captain. Group Alpha has 40 ships capable of generating uncontrolled quantum fluctuations.
Group Beta has 60 ships with overcharged warp drives that produce temporal distortions.
Group Gamma has 80 ships equipped with electromagnetic pulse generators that violate about 12 different safety protocols. And Group Delta?
Group Delta consists of 20 human vessels with crews specifically selected for their ability to improvise under pressure and their willingness to try tactics that shouldn't work but occasionally do anyway. Chancellor Prime Zekthal's expression suggested he was still adjusting to military planning sessions that sounded like descriptions of controlled disasters. Captain Chen, I must point out that this tactical approach appears to be based entirely on the assumption that organized chaos can somehow defeat organized precision.
That's exactly what it's based on, Sarah confirmed.
The Void Hunters have been successful because they operate according to non-standard physics and can therefore ignore standard defensive measures. So we're going to hit them with non-standard attacks using non-standard tactics coordinated through non-standard communication protocols. She activated the fleet command system, opening channels to all vessels simultaneously.
All ships, this is Captain Chen.
In approximately 15 minutes, we're going to engage an enemy that has never been successfully defeated using conventional military tactics. Fortunately, nobody in this fleet has been accused of being conventional. The response was a mixture of acknowledgments in dozens of languages, species-specific expressions of readiness, and what could only be described as interstellar laughter from crews who had spent the past 3 weeks learning to work together despite fundamental differences in biology, technology, and tactical doctrine. The Void Hunters expect their enemies to follow predictable patterns, organized formations, coordinated attacks, rational tactical decisions based on preserving resources and minimizing risks.
They've built their entire strategic doctrine around exploiting these predictable behaviors.
Sarah paused, watching the sensor displays as the enemy fleet closed to engagement range. Today, they're going to encounter something they've never faced before, a fleet commanded by species working together, using tactics nobody has ever tried before, with technology that was never designed to work the way we're going to use it.
Enemy fleet entering weapons range, reported the tactical officer.
They're maintaining standard Void Hunter approach patterns, phase shifting to avoid sensor locks and preparing to use their quantum disruption weapons.
Perfect, Sarah said. They're doing exactly what we expected them to do. All groups, implement formation chaos on my mark.
The next few minutes would either prove that human tactical innovation combined with allied technological diversity could overcome superior technology, or would result in the most spectacular military failure in galactic history.
Either way, it was going to be interesting. Mark, Sarah commanded. What happened next defied every established principle of space combat tactics.
Instead of organizing into coherent battle formations, the Allied fleet scattered in what appeared to be complete disorder. Ships began accelerating in seemingly random directions while simultaneously activating every piece of equipment they carried that was capable of producing unexpected side effects.
Group Alpha's quantum fluctuation generators created areas of space where the normal laws of physics became suggestions rather than requirements. Group Beta's overcharged warp drives generated temporal distortions that made accurate targeting impossible.
Group Gamma's electromagnetic pulse generators created fields of interference that disrupted not just communication and navigation, but the fundamental quantum coherence that allowed Void Hunter ships to maintain their phase-shifted state. And Group Delta, the human vessels, began implementing what could only be called aggressive improvisation on a scale that impressed even their allies. The UES Odyssey, still under Sarah's direct command despite her role as fleet coordinator, fired what appeared to be a standard torpedo spread. However, the torpedoes had been modified with quantum entanglement devices that created resonance cascades similar to the ones that had disabled the Zephyrian fleet months earlier. The UES Defiance launched a barrage of mining charges that had been reprogrammed to detonate in sequence, creating a chain reaction of subspace distortions that propagated faster than the Void Hunter ships could phase shift to avoid them. The UES innovation did something that violated so many safety protocols that it probably qualified as a new form of controlled insanity. They used their deflector array as a giant antenna to broadcast a signal that turned every piece of metallic debris in the system into a component of a massive sensor network. The effect on the Void Hunter fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Their quantum phase-shifting capabilities, which had made them effectively invulnerable to conventional attacks, began failing as the space around them became saturated with incompatible quantum states, temporal anomalies, and electromagnetic interference. One by one, the enemy ships began materializing into normal spacetime, their exotic camouflage and defensive systems overwhelmed by the sheer unpredictability of the environment the Allied fleet had created around them. Void Hunter fleet is dropping out of phase shift, reported Commander Thaxel with satisfaction. They appear to be attempting to retreat, but their navigation systems are being disrupted by the quantum interference.
All groups, transition to formation persistence, Sarah ordered. Standard engagement protocols are now in effect.
The seemingly chaotic Allied fleet suddenly reorganized into a coherent battle formation with the precision of a military parade. The random movements, the equipment overloads, the apparent disorder, all of it had been carefully coordinated to create exactly the right conditions for a conventional engagement. The Void Hunter ships, now fully materialized and unable to phase shift away from the battle, found themselves facing an enemy that had somehow transformed a disadvantageous situation into a tactical trap.
Enemy vessels are attempting to surrender, reported the communication officer. They're transmitting on standard diplomatic frequencies, requesting cessation of hostilities.
Sarah looked around the bridge at her mixed human and Zephyrian crew, all of whom were displaying expressions of amazement at what they had just accomplished.
Accept their surrender, she ordered.
And then, let's find out who these Void Hunters really are and why they've been attacking hegemony space. Chancellor Prime Zekthal moved to stand beside her as the tactical situation transitioned from combat to prisoner management.
Captain Chen, what we just accomplished should have been impossible.
The tactical coordination alone required solving problems that our military theorists claimed had no solution. Sarah smiled, the same expression that had started this entire sequence of events months earlier.
Chancellor Prime, I think that's the first time I've heard a Zephyrian say something was impossible.
Usually, you just build bigger technology until the problem goes away. This victory required more than technology, he replied thoughtfully. It required a way of thinking about problems that no single species would have developed independently.
Exactly. And that's why this alliance is going to change everything.
As the combined fleet began the process of securing Void Hunter prisoners and salvaging enemy technology for analysis, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her first encounter with War Commander Thaxol.
What had begun as a simple diplomatic misunderstanding had evolved into something much more significant, proof that cooperation between species could achieve results that conquest never could. The interrogation of the Void Hunter prisoners would reveal information that would reshape galactic politics yet again.
But that was tomorrow's challenge. Today, they had demonstrated that human innovation combined with allied technological capabilities could defeat enemies that had seemed invincible. Today, they had proven that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to refuse to accept that it was impossible in the first place. 6 months after the defeat of the Void Hunter fleet, Captain Saracen stood before the Galactic Council in the newly constructed Unity Station, addressing representatives from over 300 species. The station itself was a testament to the revolutionary changes that had swept across known space since the first human-Zephyrian alliance, a massive structure that incorporated architectural and technological elements from dozens of civilizations, creating something that was both familiar and completely unprecedented. The council chamber was designed using human principles of collaborative space planning combined with Zephyrian engineering precision, crystalline court artistic sensibilities, and mechanized collective computational optimization. The result was a space that felt both magnificent and welcoming, formal yet conducive to genuine communication. As Sarah looked out at the assembled delegates, she reflected on how much had changed since she had first encountered War Commander Thaxol. The warlike Zephyrian commander now served as the Alliance's military coordinator, working alongside former enemies to develop defensive strategies that protected smaller civilizations from aggressive expansion by larger powers. The Void Hunter prisoners, after months of careful negotiation rather than harsh interrogation, had revealed something that shocked everyone: they weren't conquerors at all. They were refugees, fleeing from something in deep space that was systematically destroying entire star systems. Their attacks on hegemony outposts had been desperate attempts to gather resources for their own survival, and their exotic technology was actually emergency adaptation rather than advanced military development. This revelation had led to the largest joint exploration mission in galactic history, a combined fleet from 17 species investigating reports of what the Void Hunters called the Devourers, entities that consumed stellar energy and left nothing but empty space behind them.
But today's session wasn't about external threats.
Today, Sarah was presenting the results of the Cultural Exchange and Innovation Project, a comprehensive study of what happened when species shared knowledge freely rather than hoarding technological advantages. Honored delegates, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the chamber thanks to translation and amplification technology that had been developed collaboratively over the past months. 6 months ago, the Galactic Council consisted of 43 separate civilizations, most of whom viewed each other as potential threats rather than potential partners. The display system, now a hybrid of technologies from 12 different species, showed a map of galactic politics as it had existed before the human-Zephyrian first contact. Territorial boundaries were clearly defined, with buffer zones between species and frequent conflicts over resources and trade routes. Today, we have over 300 member civilizations working together on projects that none of us could have accomplished independently. The change has been so rapid and so comprehensive that we're essentially looking at a completely different galaxy than the one that existed less than a year ago. She gestured to Chancellor Prime Zekthal, who had become one of the most effective advocates for collaborative governance despite his species' long history of imperial expansion. The Zephyrian hegemony has transitioned from a conquest-based empire to what they now call a facilitation-based federation. Instead of absorbing other civilizations, they provide technological and logistical support for smaller species to develop their own advanced capabilities. The former Chancellor Prime, now serving as Director of Technological Integration, stepped forward to address the Assembly. The change has been beneficial beyond our most optimistic projections. Resource efficiency across former hegemony space has improved by an average of 78%. Innovation rates have increased by factors that our previous economic models suggested were impossible. Most significantly, we have eliminated the enormous costs associated with maintaining occupation forces and suppressing resistance movements. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as Director of Scientific Collaboration, activated another display showing research achievements that had been accomplished through interspecies cooperation. The technological advances achieved through collaborative research have exceeded the combined output of all participating civilizations working independently for the previous century. The list was staggering: faster-than-light communication networks that operated in real time across galactic distances, terraforming technology that could transform dead worlds into habitable planets in decades rather than millennia, medical advances that were effective across radically different biological systems, and defensive technologies that could protect entire star systems from various forms of cosmic threats. But, perhaps most importantly, Elena continued, we've discovered that innovation accelerates exponentially when different perspectives are combined with mutual respect and shared resources. Each species contributes not just their existing knowledge, but new ways of thinking about problems that had previously seemed unsolvable. Ambassador Yelthaner of the Crystal Courts rose to address the Assembly. The crystalline being's form shimmered with patterns of light that indicated deep satisfaction and amazement, an emotional state that his species had rarely displayed in formal diplomatic settings. The transformation of galactic civilization has exceeded the most optimistic predictions of any participating species. However, it has also created challenges that require continued adaptation and innovation. The display shifted to show current projects and challenges. The exploration of devourer phenomena required unprecedented coordination between species with radically different approaches to space exploration. The integration of hundreds of new civilizations into collaborative frameworks required diplomatic innovations that pushed the boundaries of what anyone had thought possible. The management of resources and opportunities on a galactic scale required economic and logistical planning that dwarfed anything attempted in recorded history. But we have also discovered something unexpected, Ambassador Yelthaner continued. The collaborative approach pioneered by human and Zephyrian cooperation has become self-reinforcing. Each successful project creates conditions that make subsequent collaborations easier and more productive. Sarah smiled as she recognized the pattern that had become central to galactic politics. The same adaptability and innovation that had allowed humans to succeed in first contact situations was now being applied by other species to their own diplomatic and technological challenges. The question before us today, she said, is not whether this collaborative approach should continue. The benefits have been too obvious and too widespread for there to be any serious debate about that. The question is how we can structure our ongoing cooperation to handle challenges that we can't even imagine yet. War Commander Thaxel, now serving as Alliance Military Coordinator, stepped forward with a proposal that would have been unthinkable under the old system of competing civilizations. The Defense and Exploration Command recommends the establishment of rapid response fleets that can be deployed anywhere in the galaxy within standard timeframes. These fleets would be commanded jointly by officers from multiple species and would be equipped with collaborative technologies designed specifically for unknown threats. The Economic Integration Council, added Trade Director Velsana of the Mechanized Collective, proposes the creation of resource-sharing networks that would ensure no member civilization faces scarcity while others have surpluses. This would eliminate one of the primary historical causes of interspecies conflict.
The Scientific Research Consortium, Dr. Vasquez contributed, recommends the establishment of joint research stations in strategic locations throughout the galaxy.
These would serve as centers for collaborative innovation and, as training facilities where young scientists from member civilizations could learn to work together from early in their careers. Sarah looked around the chamber, seeing expressions of enthusiasm and determination on faces that ranged from recognizably humanoid to geometrical constructs of pure energy. 6 months ago, most of these species had never encountered each other. Today, they were planning joint projects that would span generations and reshape the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. All of these proposals share a common element, she observed. They assume that our best response to unknown challenges is to become more connected, more collaborative, and more innovative rather than more defensive, more isolated, and more conservative. She activated a final display showing long-term projections for galactic development under the collaborative model. The scenarios were optimistic to a degree that would have been dismissed as fantasy before recent events had proven that conventional limitations didn't apply when species worked together effectively. These projections suggest that within a generation, we could have exploration missions reaching other galaxies, terraforming projects that could support populations in the trillions, and scientific understanding that approaches the fundamental nature of the universe itself.
The chamber fell silent as the full implications of what Sarah was describing became clear.
They were not just talking about improving the status quo, they were talking about transforming the basic nature of civilization itself. However, she continued, these achievements will only be possible if we maintain the principles that have made our recent successes possible: mutual respect, shared resources, collaborative decision-making, and the willingness to try approaches that seem impossible until someone proves they work.
Chancellor Prime Zekthal rose to make the closing statement.
6 months ago, Captain Sarachin disabled my fleet using tactics that should not have worked. That event forced me to reconsider everything I believed about strength, power, and the nature of conflict itself. His scales shifted to the deep gold color that indicated profound personal reflection. What I learned is that the greatest strength comes not from the ability to defeat others, but from the ability to work with others to achieve things that none of us could accomplish alone. He turned to face Sarah directly. Captain Chen, your species has given the galaxy something unprecedented, proof that cooperation can be more powerful than conquest, that innovation can overcome any obstacle, and that the best way to face an uncertain future is together rather than alone. The standing ovation that followed was conducted in dozens of different ways by hundreds of different species, but the meaning was universal: acknowledgement, gratitude, and commitment to the collaborative future they were building together. As the council session concluded and delegates began forming working groups to implement the proposals they had discussed, Sarah found herself standing at an observation deck looking out at Unity Station's bustling commercial and cultural district. Ships from across the galaxy docked regularly, carrying not just trade goods but artists, scientists, students, and families who were building lives that span multiple worlds and multiple species. Dr. Elena Vasquez joined her at the viewport, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had spent months processing information that challenged fundamental assumptions about what was possible.
Captain, we're receiving reports from the advanced exploration fleets investigating the Devourer phenomena. They've found something interesting.
Oh?
It appears the Devourers aren't a natural phenomenon.
They're artificial constructs created by a civilization that disappeared about 50,000 years ago. The good news is that they can apparently be shut down with the right technological approach. Sarah smiled, the same expression that had become legendary across 1,000 worlds.
And I'm guessing that the right technological approach requires innovations that no single species would develop independently?
Exactly. The engineering requirements alone will need contributions from at least 30 different civilizations, and the theoretical framework requires combining scientific principles that have never been integrated before. Sarah raised her coffee cup in a toast to the bustling activity visible through the viewport. To the galaxy's next impossible problem and the collaborative solution we're going to develop to solve it. As they watched ships arrive and depart carrying representatives of hundreds of species working together on projects that were reshaping reality itself, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since she had first encountered an alien dreadnought and decided that talking was preferable to fighting. Her smile had indeed fooled empires, toppled governments, and saved entire worlds. But, more than that, it had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the galaxy was the willingness to greet strangers with friendship rather than fear, to offer cooperation instead of conquest, and to believe that any problem could be solved if enough different perspectives were brought together with sufficient determination and creativity. The galaxy was a different place now, larger, more connected, more innovative, and more hopeful than anyone had imagined possible. And it all started with a captain who chose to smile at an enemy and offer them coffee and conversation instead of surrender or destruction. Ignorance about human nature had indeed cost the old galactic order everything. But what had replaced it was infinitely better than what had been lost. The universe was vast and full of challenges that no one could face alone.
Fortunately, no one had to face them alone anymore.
Captain Sarah Chen's smile had become the symbol of a new age, and the galaxy was grateful for the lesson in the power of human optimism, innovation, and the unshakable belief that any problem could be solved if you approached it with the right attitude and enough friends willing to help find a solution. The stars themselves seemed brighter in a galaxy where cooperation had replaced conquest, where diversity was celebrated as strength, and where the most dangerous thing you could encounter was the smile of a human captain who believed that today's enemy could become tomorrow's closest ally. In the end, that belief had proven more powerful than any weapon ever devised.